Hey everybody, my name's Daryl Obert. Welcome back to Journey to VR. So the next few posts are going to be really fun. I'm going to be showing you guys lots of cool things with the Motion Graphics Toolkit. This week I'm going to be showing you part one of a two-part demo of this urban effect. What we're going to be checking out this week is how to generate that white wireframe cage getting drawn on. So let's jump into Maya and check it out now. All right, so here we are inside of Maya, and the first thing that I need to do is get a 3D version of that urban logo in my scene. That's super easy to do because it's an Illustrator file, so I can just use the SVG importer to generate the mesh. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab that guy and jump over to the SVG import, and we'll load up my file here. And what that does is that brings it in, and it's sort of hanging out, just frame up on that guy. It's at the origin, pretty straightforward, not where I want it at all. I need it over here on this wall. So to get it sort of dialed in where I want it, I'm just going to use a preset on the transformation of that guy, and that will just record a snapshot of all the attributes in your attribute editor and basically reapply those guys once you've saved them out. So I've got my logo positioned where I want it. Now the next thing that I want to do is I need to go ahead and start to modify some of the tessellations here, because that motion graphics network that we're going to be doing is going to be derived from the edges of this. So I need some extra edges in areas that are, like these flat faces here by default aren't really getting any edges shooting down them. And then some of the other areas, like these areas of high degree of curvature, have probably too many edges. So we want to modify some of the tessellation attributes on the SVG importer. Very simple to do. Just go to the SVG node. On that, go to the geometry section. And what we're going to do first is we're going to turn down the curve resolution to something like 2, and that's going to lessen the amount of edges that are in these areas of high degree of curvature. That's pretty cool. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to use the deformable mesh. We're going to kind of trick it to get some nice edges shooting down these extrusions on the areas that are flat. So as soon as we turn on deformable mesh, you'll notice a couple of things. Obviously, if we jump over to just a simple shaded mode here, the edges now are shooting down the extrusion, but it's also tessellated the faces, and that's not really what I want. So let's first dial in the amount of edges here that we get on our flat areas. I'm going to expand that out a little bit, something like that. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of all those polygons that were added onto my faces, because I don't want a bunch of edges there. So to do that, this is a pretty cool little trick. The way the deformable mesh actually works is it's another node that's in your SVG kind of network here, and it's the poly remesh node. So if you just grab the poly remesh node and go to node behavior for that guy and say, instead of normal, say has no effect, you'll see that it's no longer tessellating the front faces, but it's kept those edges that got inserted down the length of the extrusion, which is exactly what we want. So that's a super cool little trick or little hack there. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and jump back to 6 and 7 here. And the next thing we need to do is isolate the background from the foreground of this SVG file. So to do that, I'm just going to grab a face and double click on it to grab that whole shell. So this is the area that's sort of black in the urban logo. I'm going to take that guy and I'm going to use my mesh separate command to isolate that out so that we now have two pieces of geometry. We've got the back one and we've got the front one. So with that done, I'm going to basically delete my history on this guy. I really don't care about that anymore. So we'll just say edit, delete by type history. We'll get rid of those guys. And these guys are underneath this transform that's got all this wacky offset stuff in there. So I just kind of want to get everything zeroed out. So to do that, I'm just going to grab this guy and say edit unparent. And with those guys unparented, if we jump over to my channel box and just say freeze all, we can kind of re-zero that stuff out. So just good practice to kind of get everything nice and tidy. So now that we've done that, the next thing that we need to do is generate the effect of this guy getting carved off of the wall, because I need an intersection line for that wireframe effect to look cool, where it gets drawn on the wall and then the kind of the extrusions coming out to the front face that's floating in front of the wall. So to do that, it's a simple Boolean operation. Now I'm going to use this wall as my object to carve out with it, but I need to make sure that I have another version of the wall there when after the Boolean operation. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate that guy, and we'll just hide that one for now. So what we'll do is we'll grab our back face, which is, oops, didn't grab the right one. We'll grab the back here. And then I'll control click to grab my wall. And we'll just do a mesh boolean. And I'm actually going to be doing a difference using the legacy algorithm. It's going to give me the effect that I want. And you can see now if I just hit control 1 on this guy and isolate my view here and go to a wireframe, that's basically the mesh that we want to have the Motion Graphics Toolkit trace or draw on. So how do you do that? It's actually really, really easy to do. So let's go ahead and get back to my world view here, and let's go ahead and get our walls back on. This is why I made that hidden version there. So now we've got our walls back on, and I'm going to just assign the material to this guy of shiny black, and we can kind of hide our front. We don't need to see that for now. And what we're going to do is, I know that I'm going to be using this either this week or next week a couple times, so I just like to make a couple duplicates of that just to have them hanging out in my scene in case I need them, and we'll hide that guy. So the first thing I need to do is get a piece of geometry that we're going to use to trace these edges with, that ultimately is going to become the mesh network, the motion graphics network. So we're going to use a simple cylinder. So if we jump over to polygons and create a cylinder, we frame it on this guy, you can see there it is. It's sitting at the origin, and its pivot point is in the middle of the object. And that's very important. I'm going to show you why in just a second here. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back to this guy, and we're going to, actually, let's just stay focused on this cylinder here first, and I'll show you the motion graphics network getting made. So when we create a motion graphics network from an object, the default settings are going to shoot it down the x-axis, the positive x-axis, 10 objects. Pretty straightforward. Really what we want to do is we want to change our distribution type. Instead of being just a linear distribution, down the x-axis, what we want to do is we want to have this be a mesh distribution type. So to do that, we'll just jump into our mesh section, and we'll drag and drop that black logo into that Boolean operation that we made here. And if we kind of frame in on this guy right now, you can see, if we grab this guy, that it's just randomly scattering some faces on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch this over to edge, and we're going to tell it to flood fill that guy. So now that we've done that, this is really cool. If we go to the edge options for this guy, you can see that you can enable scaling. So right now, every cylinder is just that little 1 unit tall cylinder. When I turn on enable scaling, it multiplies it times the edge length, which is pretty straightforward. And you can use this little slider to basically dial in those guys to get them sort of just hanging out where it looks like your edge length, which is exactly what you want to have happen. Now the problem with this is as I start to scale this here, you can see that it's scaling off the midpoint. And the reason it's scaling off the midpoint is because it's set to center. So I don't want it to scale from the center. I want it to scale from the beginning of the curve kind of out off the wall. So if we change our alignment to start or end, you can see that it jumps it around. But the problem is that it's also taking into account the pivot point of that cylinder. The pivot point was at the center of that cylinder. So that's not going to give me what I want. I need the pivot point to be at the bottom of that guy. So how do you do that? Really simple. Just make another cylinder and replace this one with one that's been kind of offset and set up properly. So if we kind of make a new cylinder, we'll frame in on this guy. So what I'm going to do is we'll just jump over to our right view and frame in on that guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my X key to offset that guy up, and then I'm going to hit my D key to go into my pivot mode. Again, hold my X key to offset that guy down. And that looks pretty cool, but you hit the P key, or I'm sorry, the D key one more time to get back out of that. If you look at the local transforms here, it's even though my pivot point or my cursor is at the origin, you can see that it thinks it's actually translated one up, and the local pivot's down at -1 and -1. That's going to wreak havoc on the motion graphics network. In general, a lot of times when you have local offsets different from your main transforms and things like that, bad stuff happens with dynamic systems and with the motion graphics network. So to fix that, all you have to do is just go up to modify and say bake pivot. So as soon as I do a bake pivot, you can see that it zeroed my pivot out in translation, and it zeroed out my local space, which is exactly what we want. So now that we've done that, we can come back over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into our repo node for this guy. Let's just click on our distribution here. Instead of using P-cylinder 1, I've got P-cylinder 2 now. I'm just going to call this one like line maker. Just call it line. So it makes a little more sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our repo node here. We're going to drag and drop line in there, and I'm just going to tell it to delete that guy. So now, let's frame in on this guy. You can see that if we go back to our distribution here and we start to play around with our scale multiplier, they're now scaling, from the bottom of that cylinder up. Obviously, we don't want it to be at the start curve. We want it to be at the end curve. And now we can just adjust that guy to get it sort of looking, where it comes in and just starts to barely grab those guys like that. That looks pretty good. Now, I might want to make this a little bit thinner. So that's just a process of scaling down, this guy maybe to something like 0.5, kind of thin it out a little bit. It might be a little bit too small. Let's do 0.65. Let's just get really technical there. And all right, so that looks pretty good. So now if we hide this guy, what we have is we've got a a cool wireframe thing happening. Now I'm going to brighten this up a little bit with another material that's in here that's just a little brighter. And that looks pretty cool. So the next thing we want to do is we want to animate the effect of this coming on and off. And that's really easy to do using another node in the Motion Graphics Network. So if we just click on this guy, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add onto this guy a simple offset. So with that offset added on there, we're going to multiply this. Instead of offset, we're going to switch it to be multiply. And we're not going to worry about position and scale. Actually, I'll leave that on for now. And as I start to drop this guy off here, you can see that basically what's happening is it's as I start to drop down the effect, the strength slider's turning off the effect of that offset node. It's basically coming from the origin out and rotating down to assume the shape of this. And that's because with multiply, everything's set to 0. It's basically putting that guy at the origin, scaling it down to 0, and getting rid of all the rotations. We don't want that. We don't want it to evaluate position or rotation. We want it only to evaluate scale. So now you can see as I drop that strength slider on and off, I get the effect of that kind of drawing out. Now I want this to be done based on a manipulator or a volume. So that's really easy to do anytime in the Motion Graphics Network using a fall off object. So we'll just come down here to fall off object, make sure you put your scale back up to 1. So we'll just jump down here to the fall off object and we'll say create. And now we can grab that fall off object and sort of position that guy, right here. And let's just do a show all because it's not showing up. So as I start to move this fall off object around, you can see it has an effect, or as I start to scale that guy, it has the effect of turning on or off this effect. Now I want the fall off object to be the inverse of this. When the fall off object's close to these edges, I want it to go ahead and actually go and create the effect getting turned on. So to change that, we'll just go to this guy and just click the invert flag, pretty straightforward. So now wherever that fall off object goes, it adds in the effect of the objects getting drawn on. Now there's a couple of other things that you can do on this fall off node. You can actually, instead of having it be in the normal mode, which it is currently, so basically with the normal mode is the object, if they're inside of the volume, they're going to be scaled up. But as soon as they exit the volume again, they turn back off. Now you can modify that to be just an add mode so that once it gets marked dirty, it stays dirty. So notice as the edge of this fall off volume leaves, those edges are still extruded. Pretty straightforward. If you want to reset it, you just have to kind of reset your time slider here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and really what I want to have happen is I want to have this fall off object, let's just go back to normal mode here, animate around and use a motion path. Now I made a motion path already of those back faces, and I just did that by selecting the polygon edges and then using the command of modify convert polygon edge to face. So where is that? It's modify convert polygon edges to face. So I just basically went through and selected the back faces on that Boolean object earlier and duplicated that guy out. So we're going to use that guy as our motion path to send that little fall off object around. Pretty straightforward. So we'll grab the fall off object, we'll grab the curve, we'll jump over to animation and go to constraints, motion paths, we'll bring up the options for this guy. I'm going to turn off follow because I don't want it trying to calculate rotation. And we're going to say use start end of my own. So we'll just say start at 5 and end at 35. So it kind of wipes on relatively quickly. We'll hit attach on that guy. And what I did is I actually also scaled this guy down. So I kind of, frame 5, I like that scaling that I currently have. So I'll just say key selected on that guy and just kind of zero out this guy so that it doesn't start on already drawing. So we'll kind of say key selected on that guy. And now if we hit our playback, actually, I think I turned this off of being additive mode. So let's go back to add and we'll just hit play. And you can see here comes my object tracing around using that motion path to kind of go ahead and generate that effect. Now it looked like a little big, so I didn't like actually totally everything that happened there. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this guy and I'm going to scale this guy down a little bit. So with that fall off object selected, we'll just use my back arrow key to jump over to that, and I'm going to scale this down so that it's just kind of a skinny dude, something kind of like that. And let's just move scale. We'll do Shift E on that guy. And did I not get that? There. Key selected. All right, so let's see what that looks like now. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that is basically how I started off making the urban effect. I'll show you the video one more time. So in the next demo, what I'm going to show you is the effect of how to do these kind of wiping effects and bleeding the actual urban logo on, and the black kind of face is getting filled in. So that's going to be the next part 2 of this. So if you're taking the time to watch this on Vimeo or on YouTube, make sure you go back to the area. On the area, there's a lot of other demos that I've recorded, both in Maya, Max, and Unreal. There's also a lot of written articles that have interviews with our customers, sharing their best practices and things that they think are super cool in VR. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I hope you're enjoying it. Cheers, everybody.